Have you ever noticed how the most powerful moments in a conversation are often the ones where nothing is said at all? Those loaded pauses, those meaningful looks, those things left unsaid that somehow speak volumes? That's what we're diving into today. The art of wielding silence and subtext to create dialogue that's layered, emotionally resonant, and utterly unforgettable. Because here's the thing. As much as we writers love our words, sometimes the real magic happens in the spaces between them. Think about it. In real life, we don't always say exactly what we mean, do we? We hedge, we imply. We talk around the things that are too painful or awkward or vulnerable to confront head on. And those silences, those glances, those subtle shifts in tone or body language, they can communicate so much about what's really going on beneath the surface. As writers, we have the power to harness that unspoken communication and use it to create depth and nuance in our dialogue. By the end of this video, you'll have a whole toolbox of techniques for doing just that. We'll explore how to use pauses and beats strategically, how to craft subtext through implication and inference, how to enrich your dialogue with nonverbal cues, and even how to reveal character by holding back on speech altogether. Sound intriguing? Then let's jump right in. First up, let's talk about the power of a well-placed pause. I'm not just talking about the occasional ellipsis or em-dash, though those can be handy tools too. I'm talking about the moments in a conversation where the silence itself becomes a presence, conveying volumes about what the characters are thinking and feeling. Imagine a scene where two estranged siblings are reuniting after years apart. There's so much history between them, so much hurt and resentment and love, all tangled up together. And then, one of them drops a bombshell revelation. Maybe they're sick, or they've gotten divorced, or they're moving away for good. Now, you could have the other character respond right away with shock or sympathy or anger. But what if instead, you let that revelation hang in the air for a beat? What if you describe the way the silence stretches out between them, taut and heavy with all the things they're not saying? That pause becomes a character in itself, revealing the emotional stakes of the scene and inviting readers to fill in the blanks with their own intuitions about what each sibling must be grappling with internally. It's a moment of tension and anticipation that can be far more impactful than any long-winded response. So, as you're writing your own dialogue, keep an eye out for those moments where silence would naturally fall. Ask yourself, what might this pause express about what the characters are thinking or feeling? How can I use the absence of words to actually communicate something essential about their relationship or their internal state? Of course, silence isn't the only way to create subtext in dialogue. Another key technique is implication, hinting at deeper meanings or hidden agendas through the things characters say indirectly or incompletely. We've all been in those conversations where someone says one thing, but you can tell they really mean something else entirely. Maybe they're being passive-aggressive or trying to avoid a touchy subject, or hinting at a secret they're not ready to reveal outright. As a writer, you can use that kind of implicit communication to add layers of intrigue and complexity to your dialogue. For example, let's say you have a character who's just come home from a terrible day at work. Their partner asks them how their day was, and they respond with a curt, "Fine." Now, on the surface, that's a pretty unremarkable exchange. But what if you describe the clipped tone of their voice, the way they avoid eye contact, the tension in their jaw? Suddenly, that simple "fine" becomes loaded with unspoken meaning. It's an invitation for readers to infer what's really going on with that character. Maybe they're too proud to admit they're struggling, or they don't want to burden their partner with their problems, or they're secretly seething with resentment over something that happened at the office. By leaving things unsaid, you create space for readers to become active participants in interpreting the subtext and piecing together the character's true feelings and motivations. But subtext isn't just about the words themselves. It's also about how those words are delivered. That's where nonverbal cues come in. Things like facial expressions, gestures, tone of voice, even the physical distance between characters. All of these elements can add rich subtext to a dialogue scene. Let's go back to that example of the character coming home from a bad day at work. Maybe when their partner asks if they're okay, they insist, "I'm fine," but their hands are shaking as they set down their keys. Or they can't quite meet their partner's eyes. Those small physical details can clue readers into the character's true emotional state, even if they're trying to downplay it verbally. Or maybe you have a character who's trying to be brave in the face of danger, insisting, "I'm not scared," but their voice wavers slightly, or they can't stop fidgeting with their sleeves. Those nonverbal cues create a sense of contradiction or tension that enriches the subtext of the scene. As you're writing and revising your dialogue, look for opportunities to layer in those telling physical details that align with the unspoken dynamics you want to convey. You don't want to overdo it to the point of distraction, but a few well-placed beats of body language or tone can go a long way in making your dialogue feel authentic and emotionally rich. And hey, sometimes the most powerful thing a character can say is nothing at all. I know that might sound counterintuitive. As writers, we're usually all about finding the perfect words, right? But there's a real art to knowing when to strip dialogue down to its barest, most minimalist form, or even to withhold speech altogether. Think about a character who's just received devastating news, like the death of a loved one or a grim medical diagnosis. You could give them a long, eloquent monologue expressing their grief and fear and anger. But sometimes, a simple "oh" or "I see," followed by a long silence, can be far more impactful. It suggests that their emotions are so overwhelming, so complex, that words alone can't do them justice. Or maybe you have a character who's normally the strong, silent type, rarely one to bare their soul or show vulnerability. If you have them suddenly open up and share a painful memory or secret fear, even just for a line or two, that small moment of verbosity will carry so much more weight than if they were chatty all the time. The absence of their usual reserve becomes a presence in itself, revealing hidden depths of their character. As you play with silence and restraint in your own dialogue, pay attention to how much interiority and subtext can surface through those small pauses or clipped responses. Trust your readers to pick up on the emotional undercurrents and fill in the blanks. You might be surprised by how much you can communicate without saying much at all. Of course, mastering the art of subtext and silence takes practice and finesse. It's not always easy to strike that perfect balance between what's said and what's unsaid, or to trust the power of a pause over the pull of more words. But when you get it right, when you create dialogue that crackles with unspoken meaning and invites readers to lean in closer, to intuit the hidden depths of your characters' hearts and minds, there's nothing quite like it. So, my challenge to you is this. As you're writing your next dialogue scene, experiment with leaving things unsaid. Look for moments where a silent beat or a subtle implication could speak louder than a long speech. Pay attention to the interplay between your characters' words and their nonverbal cues, and see how you can use those elements to create rich, authentic subtext.